My name is Richard Capone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Let's Go Learn. And today I'm really excited to be talking about math, why and how improving math scores and scaling success. Okay, so this really is an implementation issue. So I'm excited to be talking about this because we're going to go into some details and give you lots of examples. Now, let me just first of all show you the agenda. So today I'm going to just give one slide on who Let's Go Learn is. And then I'm going to jump into some baseline factors of why math performance is so low, and then we're going to take a look at some case studies, and then we're going to do a short demo. A lot of what we're doing today is talking about these broader issues, because what my goal is to help you, who's somebody trying to turn math around, to give you information to arm you to do it at your school or district. Okay, so let me go ahead and begin. All right, who is Let's Go Learn? I founded Let's Go Learn with Dr. McCollum in 2000. Dr. McCollum ran the Reading Credential program at Berkeley. But at the very early stage, what we established was assessment is so important to turning things around for students. You have to understand why. So obviously we did reading, then we moved into math, but we did computer adaptive assessments before that term even existed. So in 2001, we launched our first assessment, and it was computer adaptive, and it ran on a modem, right? Since then, we've done a lot of different things. We've expanded. We have instruction tied into everything, and so we're going to be jumping into some of that today. All right. So first of all, I'm going to jump right in here. The number one factor, we have to understand some background factors about math, and these slides you'll be able to share these with your colleagues at your district, because my goal is to arm you to make change at your district so that you can turn things around and really boost scores, okay? But the first factor here is we have to understand upper grade level standards require foundational math skills, right? This is absolutely known and assumed, but people overlook it. So you really cannot learn higher level math, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade standards if you do not have solid foundation, and it builds on itself, right? So you need to have those skills in order to grow. Now, people have to understand it. It is really like a foreign language. If you take a 6th grader who's non-proficient in math, which means they're 2 years below as a total score, and you stick them into 6th grade math, they're going to struggle, right? And this is what it's going to look like. They're going to have so many gaps in their foundational skills and all these other areas that they're never going to be reached their full potential. They will not be able to hit 6th grade math. Okay, it's just not possible. So the sooner we acknowledge this, right, we have to approach our analysis of math using math. And this is really mathematics I'm using. I know if you do not have these skills, you will not be able to hit your grade level standards. Okay. All right. The second factor people have to understand is this is modern math. Okay, I'm sorry. This is sort of an eyeball full. This is what math is. If we look at math as a series of subs tests and going across the horizon and a bunch of skills stacking on top, right? So each one of these is like numbers, place value, comparing and ordering, addition of whole numbers, subtraction of whole number. This is what modern math is. It's very broad. This is numbers and operation, measurement, data analysis, geometry, algebraic thinking. So this is really, really important to realize this, okay? So factor 3 is scale math and close gaps. You have to have an acceleration rate around 5 to 10x, okay? This is important to understand. I like using this example is if we look at 5th graders entering into 6th grade, because a lot of times in 6th grade is when math, it really hits a whole new level of difficulty, okay? If your school district is at 30% math proficiency, this is how your students look. You're going to have about 14 to 17% who are on grade level, 20, 25 within a year of grade level, and 50 to 60% who are 2 or more years below. Now, this is a total score, okay? So when they enter in, let's say this is the beginning of 6th grade, when they enter into 6th grade, those students who are behind here, they have a shallower slope, okay? The shallower slope means they're not learning as much in a year. If you are 2 years behind in math, when you enter 6th grade, if you do nothing, you're probably only going to learn a third of a year. So by the time you end the year, you're only going to be at 4.3. So your slope of learning is low. Now, if you're within grade level, then yes, you can have a normal slope of 1. meaning you could learn 1 year in 1 year's time. So this is important to realize. We have to catch students up in a very aggressive manner. And the only way to do that is to really differentiate learning, fill in gaps specifically in the areas they need it, and we have to get these students up to speed. Now, if you draw your intervention out, especially in secondary, throughout the year, then what happens is your slope of learning stays low. You may be filling gaps, but then you have to overcome that lack of learning, that lack of understanding in the general classroom. So I'm just sort of painting this picture. I know this is a complicated thing, and I'm happy to talk to anyone in more detail if you need a presentation or how to position this here. But this is really important. So we have to be ambitious. We have to go for fast, accelerated gap filling. Otherwise, you will not be able to bring your students and turn things around, okay? All right, so here's another thing we have to realize. When we say these students, I lumped all these students who are non-proficient, I'm saying they're 2 years behind, into this single group. They are not a single group. You have to realize when you look at the students, here's a typical, this is literally 5 real students. And we looked at their profile, and this is their profile across those 44 areas of math. So these are instructional points. So this student here within N3, or this one here is fractions, right, N8. So this student here is a 2nd grade level. This student over here within fractions is a mid 6th grade. If these students were in the same classroom, this teacher would have to expand and accommodate kids who have fractions abilities from 2 to 6.5. Look at each and every one of these. How do you teach this? Okay, so we have to understand that when students have a total score of low, their profiles are not the same. So this is another factor that has to be acknowledged when you do your math planning. All right. What schools are doing to change outcomes? Okay, now I talked about this. You have to become an outlier, and I'm going to keep talking about this. So this is really, really important for you to be an outlier. So I'm going to give some examples. Right, this is Ridley. I like using this example. They're interesting school districts in Pennsylvania. Now they had consistently low middle school math scores. So they used our assessment for a year, and they saw that those gaps. They have an intense pacing guide, right, which they have to use. A lot of schools have pacing guides that are very fixed, not able to introduce intervention to the regular classrooms. They did not feel like they could do that. So the solution was they added a 7th period learning period. Now, that takes a lot of will and a lot of effort, right? So then they put the students on our Math Edge program, and they had personalized learning during the 7th period, and they turned things around, okay? This is a great option. The way they did it is they added a 7th period. They were not willing to change their pacing guide of their regular 6th, 7th, 8th grade math classes, okay? All right, Downing's another example. Okay, another middle school math. I like bringing in middle school math because this seems to be one of the biggest areas of difficulty, all right? Again, intense pacing guide, not able to introduce an intervention, almost the same profile there. So the solution they use is they use extra PE hours for math intervention. So they knew that students were exceeding the amount of PE hours. So they took students, got teachers to agree in their study period or their open period to bring students in and just sort of really monitor them and let them use personalized learning on the EDGE program, okay? All right, here's another case on Abello. So this student, again, overall low math scores, no strong MTSS intervention. So this is interesting. This school, some schools don't have a very strong intervention or MTSS program where they're not really doing pull out. So when you don't have a pull out like that, that does really affect things. So how do you deal with it? But they did have a strong federal program department. So they were basically able to pull students who are near proficient and put them into summer school. And this was, they did a 14-day intense program. They actually used our EDGE program, and they had amazing gains. In 14 days, they boosted kids from 0.25 to 0.35 years. And this is across 450 students across 2 different summers. So it's pretty amazing. All right. And again, they targeted those students and they executed. All right, here's another example, Mountain View High School. Now, this is a really interesting one. Okay, so this is a continuing education high school. It's with Dr. Smith. We did have a separate webinar where he actually just talks about his program. Now, students were not going to graduate when they're going to the continuation school, right? So basically they go in there. The great thing in the background is the principal really did allow the math department head, Dr. Smith, and other teachers go with it. So he allowed them to run with it. So what was their solution? They assessed each student using our diagnostic, and they shared that report with the kids to bring them into the process, okay? This is really important. Once the students were ready, they did a credit recovery focus, which means, hey, individually, this is the plan. I want you to graduate. This is what you need to do. So they came up with a plan, and then those students executed. Now, what they did was they actually had two different programs. They were using Exact Path for the kids who are near grade level, right? Who really maybe they just needed credit recovery because maybe they didn't show up to class, but they had strong, solid math abilities. And the students were very, very far behind. They put on our Math Edge program. Now, what they were seeing is for those students who were far behind, within 2 months, these kids were proficient. Okay, so this is pretty incredible, but also this means dropping any pacing guide. No longer were they following standard-based instruction. They were going for purely personalized learning. Okay, all right, here's one more school. This is an extreme case. 0% proficiency in math, middle school math. Literally, they had zero proficiency. Okay, students totally lost in math. Teachers and principals recognized the situation. This was done at an individual school level. They got permission to drop their standards-based core curriculum. Obviously, this is an extreme case, but I think it makes total sense. If you are not proficient, you are 2 years or more behind in middle school. So why are you spending 95% of your time on your standards-based curriculum when you need to go below it? Now, it's not to say you're not teaching those standards, right? You still are, but you need to go below. And when you talk about volume, for instance, you need to cover area of a triangle, area of a circle, area of ellipse. You need to cover those other things because they don't know that. The concept may not be that hard. All right, so they really did a total flipped classroom. Everyone worked in personalized learning groups. Teachers rotated small groups, 3 to 5 students. So complete flipped classroom, right? All right. Okay, so let me now talk a little bit about, so what I covered previously, it's about implementation. If you want to be an outlier, you want to turn your math program around, you have to look at those variables I just showed you. You can't just go with pacing guide, teachers in classroom teaching. Something has to change, and that's really important. Those slides I showed you explain why you have to do this, right? The next thing I want to do is talk about Let's Go Learn, how we're supporting this process. Okay, so this is one of the key pieces as well, is we are a diagnostic assessment. We have this, and then our diagnostic assessment drives personalized learning. So we have a personalized learning course. Now, there's other programs who have a diagnostic assessment, but not all diagnostic assessments are equal. And I'm going to explain this. We follow a diagnostic model. So we break math into 44 subtests. We find the students' skill within each of these. Now, we are using special education a lot too, so we call that the present level. So within place value, the students right here, within addition of whole numbers right here, within subtraction of whole numbers there. Each one of these maps to a specific skill and concept, right? So it's not just a number we're throwing out there, like a scaled score, 576 numbers in operation, 450 geometry. No, those numbers are not tied to anything. A diagnostic model ties numbers to skills and concepts and action. So if we take a look at this one column here, we see this is what this column is. Place value, ones, hundreds, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, expanded form, millions. This is how you teach it. And this is where the student is right there. And this is the 2 skills you need to teach next. So that exists throughout every single subtest, right, in mathematics. Okay, so let me just quickly show this to you. I'm going to actually jump into an account. Okay, yes, you can see it. Okay, so I am logged into an account. This is real data, but what's happened is we obfuscated the students' names. Let me just zoom this in a little bit so it's a little bit bigger. Okay, so now this, initially you may say, well, these scores, you see Mason, Sarah, Glenn, total score, 1.4. These are grade level scores, 3.44 years. These are your strand scores, numbers and operations, measurements, data, geometry, algebra. This is very typical. You may see these in a lot of other assessments, okay? But here's where we are not typical. If you take these scores and let's break out numbers and operations, I'm going to click on the numbers and operations tab. And this is where a diagnostic model assessment is different. We now break it into 14 subtests: numbers, place values, ordering and comparing, addition of whole numbers, subtraction of whole numbers, all the way up to decimal operations, percentages, ratios. So this is very detailed. Now, each one of these, if it's green, it means they've maxed out. They've mastered this entire subtest. Addition of whole numbers, the student has mastered all of them, right? So this is what's really cool. If I want to take a look at any one of these, I can actually grab place value, which I was showing you before. And let's take a look at my entire class in the instructional place value scope and sequence. So now this is it. These 3 students have totally mastered place value. These students are working at 2-digit place value. And these students at the very top are working on identifying decimal place value. This is my instructional groups. This is great for inclusion. This is great for small groups. Whatever you want to do. If I was also trying to do some scaffolding for some lesson, I know I needed all my students to know decimal place value, I could select this all here and hit homework and give all of them, these students right here, in a lesson from our Edge library and say, okay, I'm going to give them a single 10-minute lesson on a place value. Great. I can go ahead and do that, right? So this is really powerful. Now, of course, if we go back over here and take a look at this, let's go into another one. Let's go into subtraction of whole numbers. Here's another one. This is the scope and sequence is not as extensive. Students will subtract single digits, multi-digits without regrouping, and then multi-digits with regrouping. These are the 3 skills that we teach. Again, I see these students here. Okay. Now here's what's also really powerful. This data, whether you're using it in a flipped classroom manner to teach certain things, grabbing kids who you know are struggling with certain concepts, you could find those, right? Or you can also use it to drive your personalized learning. So if I go to Edge, every single student gets a full lesson, a personalized lesson. So let's go ahead and take a look at, let's see here, Dolores. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at her upcoming lessons, and she's a 9th grader, actually. All right, so if we look at her, this is actually really typical. She's a 9th grader, right? But look at this. She's got 2 lessons she needs at 2nd grade level. She's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lessons at 3rd grade level, a handful at 4th grade, a bunch at 5th grade. These are the lessons, the gaps that need filling. Now, typically, a lot of other programs would just come up with a number and place the student into some linear sequence across everything. And it would miss some of the low-level stuff, and then some of the stuff would be too hard or too easy. And so you really have to be nuanced in order to get that accelerated, that 5 to 10x acceleration. All right, so this is a core piece of our program that's really important to understand. The other piece about all this is that as you're working on this, we do have progress monitoring. So if you give a quiz on fractions number line or measurement, a certain area or something like that, and the student passes it, it actually will pull the lessons out as well. So our system is very dynamic. Anytime you give an assessment, so if I'm taking a look at these scores right here, and let's take a look at the summary here. If you start giving different quizzes or lessons, or it'll actually recalculate these scores as well, right? So you could have this running progress monitoring for MTSS as well for special ed. Now, generally, they may not be as concerned about that progress monitoring. They just want the fully automated instruction to go in there and help remediate the students. Okay, so this is the really key to why our program, this model, actually can drive personalized learning. So let me go ahead and actually quickly come over here. Okay, I'm going to bring up the slide. One last thing, and then we're going to take questions. Okay, so the other thing here is, this is back to that whole model of how we're looking at math, right? If you wanted to drive personalized learning, having these single scores at the strand, like 745, 640, 580, is not sufficient to drive personalized learning. It may be good for an accountability model, right? So this is your numbers and operations. These are all the skills that you teach, each one of these little lines. This is measurement, data analysis. You really have to have these things. And this is where I use an analogy, right? If you know your task is to move people, you're going to have a van. But if your task is to move furniture, you may use a truck. So you really have to decide what is the tool for the job, right? By deciding how your students look, their profile, their gaps, and realizing the speed in which you need to accelerate and do intervention, the choice is clear. Now, obviously, we're saying our tools will do this, but you could also do this in theory with a teacher, right? If you have a really great teaching staff who knows how to assess and evaluate, they could do this too. Or you may have a combination of lots of CDMs where you could do it. It doesn't matter. This is the model you need to adopt, right? All right. These slides again will be sent to you guys, so you can look at those case studies we have. Let's go ahead and take some questions, and let me see. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you have questions, go ahead and enter it into the Q&A dialogue. I think there's a chat one, and there's also a Q&A one, and so I'm going to bring this over here to the side. Okay, so one of the first questions is, you mentioned that Adam is good for progress monitoring. Can you expand on that? So let me just explain why it is good for progress monitoring, right? We have all this data, and I think I mentioned that we're using a diagnostic model. So this is that same list of all of the skills. So this is how the student actually looks. This is a real student. So you see that all these green points are the instructional point for the student across all these 44 subtests. So once you start teaching these kids, this is fractions. The student's really low in fractions. So you teach them these 5 skills and you teach them these 2 skills right here. If you give them a quiz right here and they master it, we now have a new column that has a new stack. So if I restack this and recalculate in a model like this that is criterion referenced, we now recalculate this fraction score. So we recalculate multiplication. We get a new score right here. This in turn allows us to recalculate our total score. So we have progress monitoring that is triggered on any quiz. No other assessment does this, because if you use something like iReady or MAP or anything else, this is the way they're scoring. They're giving a cross-section of the score for a 4th grader. They're coming up with a scaled score of 650, but that is only generated when you give all of the items, right? Or if they're doing something else, they're doing it really based on some kind of estimated system. We're not doing an estimated system. This is hard science. This is a calculated score that is absolute. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Oh, interesting. Exact path advertised, exactly what you're talking about. How does this compare to what you're talking about? Okay, so that's interesting. I talked before about that one case in Dr. Smith and Mountain View High School. They use exact path, so don't take it from me. Exact path, they may advertise it, but they use the scoring like this. This is, if you look at exact path, the scores they generated are strand scores, 650, 525, 670, within each of the 5 areas of math. That's what they use to place students into personalized learning, right? And he even said it himself, it was really good for kids who are maybe within grade level, but it wasn't good for those students who are, because how do you use a 650 to place students in here? It's just not possible, right? We do it by actually having, 4.9, 4.9, 4.5, 4.5. We have 14 scores in numbers and operations, 11 in measurement, 10 in data analysis. That's how we do it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions. Actually, let me just go down to my last slide here. Okay, so I think we're almost done. If another question pops up, I'll go ahead and answer it, but let me just sort of conclude. All right, so don't be a statistic, right? We have lots of people lamenting about low math scores, and I've heard so many, talk shows and people talking about education and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to be a statistic. You become an outlier by doing something different, right? Yes, you're not going to solve the problem if you just do what you've been doing. So you have to change your model. So this really, while we're talking about our tools, and I think our tools are really incredible, it's about changing your model. It's about implementation. Okay, develop an math educational model. Don't say your model is core curriculum, right? That's not a model. That's instruction that you are jamming down, into the classrooms. No, you have to have a model, okay? And that model could be an MTSS model, right? It could be something like that. So you need to have it. Use technology to your advantage. What we are showing today is unique, but actually we've had it out. The Adam assessment has been out for 13 years. So our technology has been around. People need to learn how to use it, right? Math is ideal for personalized learning. It really has to be flipped. And that's really something to be important. Yes, I'm not saying teachers are not important. They absolutely are important. Look in the case of Dr. Smith, he flipped his classroom, but he really worked with each student. When someone says, hey, Dr. Smith, I'm really confused about, place value. Can you explain this? He would help unjam students when they got a lesson they didn't understand. And he was constantly doing personalized, coaching, but he put them into the path to begin with, right? All right, that is it. Oh, last thing I just want to mention too, we did just recently get the CASE endorsement. So our entire platform was endorsed by CASE, which is a diagnostic assessment in the instruction for use in special education, which is what CASE is. It's Council for Administrators of Special Education. All right, I think we are almost out of time. Thank you so much. And you see my email address there. You can also go to our website. If you want to talk to an expert, we have a bunch of buttons. You click on it and someone will talk to you about your specific needs, your implementation. While I talked a lot about this, you don't have to do it by yourself. We will help you implement, right? It doesn't have to be hard, but also you have to be willing to pick the right model for the right age group. Elementary implementations for math, middle school, high school, they're all very different. It's not a one size fits all. All right, thank you so much and enjoy.